Welcome to Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. It is my pleasure and delight, and also an honor to welcome the guest on this particular episode, Professor Akhlesh Lakhtakia. Akhlesh is very well known among people who do research in optics. Anybody who does optics research would probably be knowing Akhlesh. And he is joining me today from the US. And the great thing about this particular person is that he is a scholar and a scholar of very highest order. And he's a professor at the University of Penn State University. And he has had a very illustrious career in various different aspects of research and teaching and mentoring. And I'm delighted to have Akhlesh on Pratidwani. Welcome to Pratidwani, Akhlesh.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So, Akhlesh, Pratidwani also, as the theme goes, is to humanize science. Our main motivation is for us to really get the flavor of how you became a scientist. And we do this through the biography of the person who is generally kind of talking to us. So, give us a kind of an overview of where were you born and what was your experience, and we'll take our conversation from there.
All right. Well, I was born in Lucknow in 1957, and I was educated partly in Lucknow, partly in Delhi. So it was Lucknow first, Delhi next, and then Lucknow back again. I finished high school, or what they called Indian School Certificate Examination. That was in November 73. And in summer of 74, I joined what was then called the Institute of Technology, Banaras Hindu University, and now I think it's called the Indian Institute of Technology, BHU. And I was there for 5 years. It used to be a 5 year program, Bachelor's of Technology, and I specialized in electronics engineering.
Mm.
And after about 3 months or so, I joined the University of Utah Department of Electrical Engineering for a master's degree and a PhD. I graduated from there in 1983. Uh, I think May 1983 now. Okay, and then I became a postdoc at Penn State in a very strange department called Department of Engineering, Science and Mechanics, ESM. I call it the Department of Engineering and Scientific Misfits. Basically, we can we can do whatever we want to do in this department. Uh, it's the honors department for bachelor's programs of the College of Engineering at Penn State. And all our students would get honors degrees. Uh, Now, other departments also award honors degrees, so we are not that exclusive. But here, the entire program is meant for honors students. There is a research component for the bachelor's degree, uh, and sometimes the research that our undergraduates do are actually published in peer-reviewed journals. Then a few years later, I was given an opportunity to join the faculty, which I did, and so that's where I have been all this while. I've been here
Wow,
at it
wonderful.
for 40 plus years.
40 plus years. Wow,
Yeah.
amazing, amazing. So we'll go through this each step of your transition from one place to another. Paint us a picture of how it was to grow up in Lucknow, and what was the kind of education you got. How was your ecosystem at your home? What was the kind of support system you had at home for your education? If you could let us know a little bit
Well, I mean, that was a very
about
long time ago, it
that.
seems. So I don't remember all of it, of course. I
Yeah,
do remember
yeah,
a
yeah.
few things. And one thing that I do remember my parents telling me later, at a later date, is that when I was about 5 years old, they had to decide which school to send me to. I was their eldest child. And they looked around and then they decided that they will send me to an English medium school. I, of course, had no idea about the difference between Hindi and English medium schools at that time, but that's what they decided to send me to. And in retrospect, I think that was the right decision they took. It was a. I'm very grateful for their sacrifices because the cost of that education was very high compared to their means. I'm really very grateful to them for having given me and my brother and my sister later that opportunity. That, of course, meant a lot of deprivation for themselves. But, well, I guess that's what good parents do. Then I was there in a school for, I think, 1964. In 1964, my father got a job in Delhi. So he used
Mhm.
to work for the UP Civil Secretariat, and he was deputed to the State Trading Corporation in New Delhi. He moved there, and a few months later, once the year was over, my mother and at that time only my brother and I we joined him. So we went to a school called Cambridge School there,
Mhm.
and that
That's a
two
usual
brothers
name.
became huh?
That's a usual name in lot
Yes,
of places. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
Cambridge School, and well, it was certainly a school where education was. Was emphasized. Education, I meant, not simply rote learning,
Mhm.
was emphasized. And then in 1969, my father moved back to Lucknow, and so did we. Okay, by that time I had a little sister also, and we moved back to Lucknow. And then I started going to a school called St. Francis High School. I think it's called St. Francis College now. Okay. And in those days, it would end in class 11. That's when the Indian school certificate exams would end, would be held. And then that was in November 73. Sometime, I think in April or May 74, I took part in the JEE for the IITs. And I ended up having to make a choice. And as it turns out, nobody really was able to give me much of advice.
Mhm.
IITs certainly were important institutions that everyone knew, but the difference between IIT, BHU, and IIT was not very well appreciated. Again, I think I took the right decision because I took it by myself to join IIT BHU. I reckoned that a university is multicultural. Uh, I don't think I knew the word then, but I just thought there would be many different types of people. And in contrast, the IITs would be monocultural. And I thought multicultural is the place where I would want to be. Okay, so I took that decision. My chacha, who was a judge, had accompanied me to this interview, and he certainly had no idea of the importance of this discussion of this decision. So I went there, and 5 years had some had some indifferent experiences and some wonderful experiences. I came in contact with a couple of wonderful professors. One of them is he's no more, unfortunately. His name was Prasad Kastagir. He was a
Mhm.
professor of physics. And amazingly, in the evenings, many professors at ITBHU lived on campus in houses, and in the evenings he would have sort of an open house, and you could drop in. Students and other professors would drop in and have a cup of tea occasionally, and then talk about this and that. And I was introduced to Harry Belafonte, for example, Banana Boat and Jamaica Farewell, and to Jagjit Singh, for that matter.
Wow,
Yeah,
nice.
Sarakti Jai Hai Rukh Se Nakab Ahista Ahista. I remember I listened to that then. And
Beautiful.
we talked about other things, for example, uh, the book of Poincaré on the philosophy of science. I'm not sure if I could have understood all of it, but certainly Professor Kastiger you know, gave the gist of it. And I began to understand that science is not something that we do in a laboratory. It's also a process of thinking. Okay. And then I had to, in my fifth year, because this bachelor's degree in those days was a 5-year program, I had to decide what to do. And quite, I mean, I was not sure if I wanted to continue with engineering as such. I appeared in the exam for the Indian Institute of Management, for example. And also, I think IISC had an entrance exam at that time, or some sort of an entrance uh, procedure. I, did that. And also, one day, a friend of mine, and this is in college, we lived in the dormitories. He said to me, Akhlesh, haven't you applied to United States? And I said, why? I don't want to go to United States. And he said, you're making a mistake. And he brought me some forms. These were aerograms, printed aerograms, and you had to fill in your name, etc., and the address of the university that you would send it to, and of course you had to put a stamp on. Those were expensive things in those days. Uh, and so I applied to a few universities. Some of them sent me their application forms, and well, it was not easy to fill out those forms for the simple reason that there was an application fee of $25, and that was a lot of money. Certainly, a lot of money in those days for most middle class people, for my parents for sure. So, I one university agreed to defer that payment until after I arrived, and that was the University of Utah at Salt Lake City. You see, this is very important. I want to point out they were humans.
Very
Okay,
nice. Very
like in
nice.
this, yes, I applied and I was selected, and then had to go with my dad took me to the American Embassy in New Delhi. Uh, I for a visa. I There were 8 students who were applying for a visa that day, and I was the only one who got a visa. And
Wow.
then
Mm.
I went to United States and did my master's
This
first.
was which year? Which year,
So
Akhilesh?
I went there in 1979 September. I landed in United States on the 17th of September 1979.
Fabulous.
Yes, and my master's exam, the final exam, I had to defend a thesis, and all that was held. I can't recall now when, but must
Mhm.
have been sometime in June or so of
Nice.
1980.
Nice.
So I
1980.
did that, got my the professor signed my thesis, everything was okay, and unfortunately I didn't get my degree for about a year more, because in those days the United States government had changed the laws regarding copyright.
Mhm.
And one I had written 2 journal papers, and for one of them, and to include them in my thesis, I needed permission because the copyright was held by the publishers.
Mm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
was strange things. These things happen. American Geographical Union was moving its headquarters, so nobody knew how to write me a permission letter. And anyhow, so it took several months for me to get a permission letter. So my degree came much later. Uh, anyhow, I just continued with my PhD,
Mhm.
and then in 1982, in August, late July 1982, August, I met my wife, and she was she was studying meteorology. She had just come to study meteorology at the University of Utah. So we met. Well, we got married, and I finished my PhD, and I got a postdoc at Penn State. My wife wanted to go to Penn State because at that
Mhm.
time and even now, Penn State was among the foremost universities in the world in atmospheric sciences. So she
Yes.
wanted to continue her studies there. So I got a postdoc and I joined this department, and well, that's what happened.
Wonderful. Wonderful. This is also a kind of an overview what you've given us, which will also require some kind of a drive on your part, right? Because as a person who is kind of looking for opportunities and very deeply interested in science, you would be interested in looking at how well you can do as a scientist, and therefore US is one of the places where you felt that it's going to be the most effective place. So during that particular transition, when you're making from India to US, how was your feeling? Like, were you comfortable? Was the transition easy culturally? Was it also something which you were already aware of, you had read, or was it something very refreshing and very new for you? Because 1980s, at the end of the day, we are still in an ecosystem in India where things are still going at a slower pace. We are yet not yet opened our economy, which means that we are not exposed to Western kind of technology, etc. How was your experience during that time?
You are absolutely right.
Mm.
You are absolutely right. Very, very few people in India, I think, knew what the so-called West was like.
Mm.
Okay, and people-to-people contacts were very few. Also, uh, I I was born in a family of basically lawyers and administrators. They I've tried to look back into what my family did years ago, and at least from the time of about from about 1570s or so, is the best that I can
Wow.
trace. They have been involved in they have been involved in basically revenue collection,
Hmm. Hmm.
and in fact, that is how my name Lakhtakia comes about. The last
Like,
name Lakhtakia,
yes, yes.
Lakhtaka.
That
That's
tech.
lakh taka. So that's why. So they were in revenue collection. Uh, Somewhere around the 17, 10, 17, early, very early 1700s. They were in Bareilly, district Bareilly in UP.
Bareilly, UP.
Yes,
Yes,
in
yes.
a place called Faridpur. Now I think it's called Pitambarpur,
Hmm.
and that's where they were. And they were, you know, whatever you want to call them, minor barons of some sort, baronets, perhaps, something of that kind. Uh, and they collected revenue on behalf of eventually the Mughal Empire. Okay. But there were layers in between. The Nawab Wazir of Awadh was there, for example. And then ha, for a while, the Rohilas, who were the local overlords, were there. And then, of course, these people came. Uh, and that has been the case with my family for that since that time. There are plenty of lawyers, there have been plenty of administrators. Even the few engineers in my family actually were really executive engineers or something like that, because effectively they were administrators. They were not really engineers. They did not function as engineers. Uh, so I remember a few years ago, I was actually asked to pinpoint, if I could, the time when I decided to become a scientist. And after some time, I could actually. I thought, and that was in on the 20th of July, 1969. Uh,
Wow.
the Apollo 11 was going to land that day on the moon, and there was no television, at least in the building in which my my family lived in Lucknow. And what I do recall is that every so often there would be the regular programming on radio would be disrupted by a bulletin about what was happening, and it was exciting. That humans were going to land on the moon. Just amazing. And at that point, I decided this is what I want to do. Not perhaps land on the moon, but the things that enable us to land on the moon. Okay, and I didn't even have words to describe. I think I was in the seventh grade at that time. Okay, didn't have words. So it took me a couple of more years to start understanding what I really wanted to do, the disciplines that I should follow, and I wanted to become an engineer. And at that time, electronics engineering was a newest entrant in the colleges of engineering, so it had a lot of cachet.
Mm.
And I said, okay, this is what I want to study. And ITBHU offered me that option, and that's why I joined. So much of the work that I did, academic work that I did as an undergraduate student, was in electronics engineering, which in those days for me was loosely translated into what we call today computer science.
Mm.
There was no computer science in those days, at least in India. I, okay. Uh, but I remember I did things like microprogramming, and designed an ALU and so on and so forth,
Mhm.
things of that kind. And then I got bored with that. I can't see myself doing this the rest of my life. And by a chance, perhaps, I was introduced to Maxwell's equations. And I can tell you it was love at first sight.
Fantastic. Yes, yes, of course. Yeah.
I said, this is what I want to do. See, what made me so excited was that here are these four equations, small in number, just four, just four. And they're quite compact equations. Not that I understood the idea of compactness, but they were short equations. Okay. And yet they describe the enormity of the of all electromagnetics phenomena. And that held me in thrall. And that has held me in thrall ever since. It was just to know about Maxwell's equations, I think, is a great blessing.
Yes,
And that one
absolutely.
can manipulate them and once in a while solve them.
Mm.
Okay. And then sometimes be able to correlate against experimental data. I think I'm in just a fantastic place to be in. Yes.
What a pleasure. What a pleasure. What a pleasure. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, this also means that when you are now getting exposed to the Maxwell's equation, you probably make a very deep connection because one of the aspects in your own master's thesis was to look at the near field. That is something which is very fascinating. And it is a concept which is generally not kind of, taught at the level of, let's say, undergraduate courses, generally speaking, at least to certain extent, unless you were introducing the concepts in terms of evanescent waves or something like that. So that is probably one of the points where you are also getting into electromagnetics, right? Because that's a place where probably you are also kind of exploring these questions. How did you make that particular connection? Because here you started with electronics engineering, where you're talking about microprocessors, etc. And now you're transforming into a kind of electrodynamics, electromagnetism, optics. It's already kind of diverging into a very interesting arena. Could you tell us a little bit about that transition? That's a very seems to be a very fabulous kind of prospect.
Well, so I obviously had not much of an idea of the grandeur of a field theory.
Yeah.
It's a field. I mean, this is what's important is not electromagnetics, but a field theory. Really, that's what is important. Okay, I had not much of an idea of that. Uh, in fact, I'll towards the end of my PhD, I happened to look at a journal. Uh,
Mm.
and I said to myself, the technique that I have devised to solve these particular boundary value problems. So I should tell you a little bit about the techniques that I had
Yeah,
been.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So at that time, there was a great deal of concern that human beings were being exposed to microwaves
Mm.
and that there were health effects. There were effects that were deleterious to human health. And for that matter, the health of other biological objects, cows, for example, and in
Mm.
fields. And so the University of Utah was at the forefront of that kind of research at that point. And they were particularly concerned They did experimental work, which I did not participate in, at least in the beginning. Okay, but they also tried to predict what kind of exposure effects would be there, and for that you had to construct a model. And the model of a human being that they constructed, which we affectionately called the Easter egg model, was that of a prolate spheroid.
Mm.
Still remember the axial ratio was 6.34 is to 1.
Oh,
Okay.
wow, precisely.
Yes. Yeah, so it was a prolate spheroid, major to minor axis, 6.34. That was the ratio. And but this was a very elongated object, very far from a sphere. And it's hard to imagine nowadays, but computational electromagnetics was in its infancy in the
Mm,
70s. Okay. There was a technique called a method of moments that had just kind of emerged. Um, it was it was becoming clear that the finite element technique would not work
mm, mm,
satisfactorily at that point. And there were a host of other techniques that were devised. Method There was a uni moment method, for example, and then there were
mm.
some hybrid techniques that had been devised, but they were all turning out to be quite failures. FDTD, the technique that many people use today, was yet not around, or at least
Interesting.
not being talked about that much.
Talked
Okay.
about. Okay. Yeah.
Uh, the technique that my advisor asked me to use was called the extended boundary condition method.
Mm,
And it eventually, actually, it, like all other integral equation techniques, it traces itself back to the extinction theorem that was proved by two people independently. uh, Peter Paul Ewald
mm,
and
mm.
Hossein, uh, in the early 1900s, in
Yes.
1950, 1920, 1912, 1913, somewhere around that. Evolved. So
Yes.
it's called evolved Hossein extinction.
Ocean extinction theory.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
That I have to say, that is a theorem of unsurpassed beauty. Just amazing. Almost all of electromagnetics today, computational electromagnetics, is based on this theorem.
Based on theory.
There are many
Yes.
people who use computational electromagnetics don't even know about this theorem. But that's so. But this theorem was the cornerstone,
Mm,
explicit cornerstone of this extended boundary condition method. And I started looking at it, but extended boundary condition method would actually fail
mm,
when the object became too non-spherical and the frequency became high. Okay. And the reason for the failure was ill conditioning of a matrix. Okay. I mean, I have to tell you this. At that time, the
mm.
largest program one could have it had no more than 232 kilobytes. Hard, hard to imagine that today. 232
Absolutely.
kilobytes. So, was this a failure of a lack of computational resources, or was that is the failure of what was the problem? Anyway, so I actually ended up devising a technique called iterative extended boundary condition method, which you solved the same problem many times, but you kept on
Mm.
improving. That was the whole idea,
Input.
and eventually it converged. If it converged, then you say, okay, this is it. I have my result. Okay, so that is what I did, and it was it was quite an interesting thing. And I happened to take a look at an acoustics paper. Now, again,
Ah,
this is the time far before PDFs. So there was a huge central library, and you had to go there, and if you found browse through bound volumes, etc., and then if you found a paper that you wanted very badly, you had to take it to a central Xeroxing office in the library and Xerox and bring it back. Okay. Once in a while, we were allowed to check out the book itself, and I could bring it back to my department Xeroxing facility, which was cheaper. um, somewhat, and then had to return the volume to the library within whatever it was, 2 hours or so, something like that. So I looked at it, I said, this is amazing. This is acoustics. This was an acoustics problem. I said, no, this problem can also be solved this way. And,
Nice.
and it was certainly not an electromagnetics problem, very different in many ways, but also mathematically similar. Okay. So I said to my advisor, I said, would this, I saw this problem. Do you think I can solve this also in the next whatever? Should not take too much
Mm,
time. He says, we don't do such problems. We do only electromagnetics problems. And I said, oh, well, okay. All right. So I did solve that problem later. Um,
nice.
yeah. And okay, using this iterative extended boundary condition method. But what I wanted to say was that this was an early introduction to the fact that there is a great deal of commonality between supposedly diverse areas of physics, okay, and engineering, okay, for me at least, electrical engineering, uh, and it is great to be able to know many different things because then they cross fertilize each other. And when I came to Penn State as a postdoc, I ended up solving elastodynamics problems. Now, this is,
Mhm.
using tensors, for example, okay,
Tensors.
and
Tensors. Yeah. Yeah.
triadics, not simply dyadics, but triadics. And I certainly had not much of an idea about these kinds of things. I did not know what stress was. I didn't know what strain was. Okay, and I don't mean in the simple high school sense here. Okay, uh, but that there was commonality because of mathematics. Okay, that was liberating. I ended up publishing a couple of papers in the Bulletin of the Seismological Society of America, and one in Journal of Chemical Physics, for example, on
Mhm.
the scattering
Yeah.
of helium atoms by
Yes.
crystals. Right? They also answer to the same mathematics. Okay. So what that meant was that one should, at least in my mind, I should not think of being confined
Mm.
to a single cabin. In I said, the world is mine. The world is my oyster. I should do whatever I want to do. Okay. And that
Wonderful.
that I think has pervaded my professional life. Uh, uh, okay, for the last whatever 40 odd years or so, I should be able to do whatever I want to do. uh, that's not a sentiment that was widely shared until very recently, when we started to talk about multidisciplinarity and
Yeah.
interdisciplinarity. But well, as I said, I had an early inkling to it, going back to the time I had to make my selection for ITBHU versus IITs, perhaps.
Fabulous. Fabulous. This is something which is, kind of very fascinating, given the fact that it's also not only in terms of breadth but also the depth. That is a unique aspect of your work, where you have been able to look at problems in significant detail, and more importantly make connections to many of the problems, such as biomimicry, which is a very fascinating topic by itself. And some very fascinating work has also emerged out of your lab and your group. So now, finishing this particular masters and then going into the PhD, and now you're moving to a slightly more complex problem. So, what is the kind of work you did during your PhD? What is the kind of problems you were looking at during that time?
So for the PhD, I actually did the same
Ah,
problem, but I
okay.
this time I for the masters I had used the extended boundary condition method to solve
Mm,
scattering by a human being, or the model
mm,
of a human being,
mm, mm.
scattering of microwaves, uh, about, if I remember correctly, from about 30, well, maybe 20 megahertz to about 200 megahertz or so. But then wanted to extend that,
Mm.
and that is where I had to devise my iterative method, and that was my PhD. So when I came to Penn State, I actually extended this iterative method to acoustics, and then I wanted to extend it to elastrodynamics,
Mhm.
and I did that a little bit, and then I actually fell in love with a particular type of a problem. Which again goes back to my undergraduate days. There was a professor at IIT whose name was Chalam, Professor Chalam.
Mhm.
He was a department head of electrical engineering in those days, not electronics. And for some reason, he asked me to come over to his home one day. And, I spent some time talking to him. He was a PhD from University of Pennsylvania, as it turns out. Uh, and talked about this and that. And then he gave me a book.
Mhm.
I don't remember much about the book, except that in the first 2 or 3 pages, that book talked that the authors talked about creepers, how creepers go around the trunks of trees, and they either go clockwise or counterclockwise. And then they talked about why some molecules are counterclockwise and so on and so forth. That's what I remember, and I was introduced to the term chirality.
Mhm. Mhm.
So at the University of Utah, there was a professor who had just published a paper on chirality as electromagnetics. Okay, in chirality. Uh, no, I was becoming aware of it, and then at when I came to Penn State, I did some stuff on my own uh, on chirality, and I solved the electromagnetics equation, the equivalent of what may be called the Helmholtz equation
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
chiral materials, isotropic chiral materials, and
Carolyn.
I solved it incorrectly,
Mhm.
and it was published. Okay,
Mhm.
and uh, I of course had no idea I solved it incorrectly, but later I found that I had over approximated.
Nice.
That was the problem. Okay, I had over approximated. So if you admit to that approximation, yes, you can do that. Okay, but that approximation, uh, you almost threw the baby out with the bathwater. That was something like that. But then uh, I began to realize I had made an error. At least in thinking, I should not have thrown that term out. And quite by a chance, I met a person named Craig Boren, who was,
Yes.
who
Yes.
was a professor of meteorology here at Penn State. Uh, and Craig says, you know what? I wrote my PhD thesis on scattering by isotropic chiral spheres. So I said, wow, just send me those papers, which he did.
Okay.
And that is when I became convinced I had over approximated. And that there was no need to over approximate, to solve the problem. And that really launched me into a completely different electromagnetics. That is the electromagnetics of complex materials.
Mhm. Mhm.
Most electromagnetics at that time I'm talking about was done in free space or in isotropic dielectric materials. Okay. I'm talking of certainly about engineering and applied physics literatures here.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm not talking about, fundamental physics literature. Okay. Uh, and I said, but materials are so much more complicated than simply isotropic dielectrics, or for that matter, even crystals, and
Mhm.
isotropic dielectrics. They can be far more complicated. And so I spent several years trying to create an electromagnetics of isotropic chiral materials. So I said,
Mhm.
if
Mhm.
you have a surface equivalence theorem, if you have a volume equivalence principle in normal electromagnetics, normal here means isotropic dielectric electromagnetics, then what is its equivalent for isotropic chirality? Okay.
Nice.
Uh, the extended boundary, the Ewald-Hossein extinction theorem, I changed that into extended it to isotropic chiral materials, and then I realized that this is only the beginning. You see, simplicity is actually, well, simple, and complexity is complex. There is no end to it.
Mm.
Okay. And so we came to linear, well, bi-anisotropic materials and isotropic materials, uh, then of course nonlinear materials, and then you can have
Mm.
nonlinear bi-anisotropic materials, and so on and so forth. There's no end to it. Okay.
Into it.
No,
Absolutely.
there's no end to it, and it was fascinating. So this is also, I was at the right place at the right time in a way.
Mm. Mm.
So this is the time when what we may call today complex materials electromagnetics was being born, and I was just, you know, one of the people who was, well, giving birth to it, so to say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just in the right place, right time, and fortunately, my university at that point did not put a great deal of pressure on finding funding, because to find funding for something of this kind was extremely difficult in those days. It's
Mm.
only
Mm.
from the year 2000 or so that complex materials electromagnetics is now funded. But in those days, they'll say, why do we need these materials? And that I submitted my first paper on chiral electromagnetics, and
Mm.
the
Mm.
associate editor wanted to know what was the use of these materials, that they should even consider sending the paper out for review. Okay.
Mm.
So, and I said to him, I wrote to him actually, I said to him something like that something like 70% of you is made of those materials. Okay.
Good one. Good
Could
one.
be. So that convinced him. Okay. But that this problem would persist until even in the mid 90s, that people would ask me, so you have dreamt up these constitutive relations. What good are they? And I said, you see, for these are not dreamt up constitutive relations, okay, in the sense that they don't exist. Materials that are described by these constitutive relations do exist. And if they don't exist, I think we can create recipes to make them artificially, because the idea of complex composite materials was also being born just about in the early 90s. Okay. So I said, we can actually engineer these materials. Today, I like to say that these are architected materials. The term I use is architect.
Absolutely.
But nano engineering, at that time, nobody used the word nano engineering. That really came
Mm.
into vogue from just about late 90s, early 2000s. That the term became commonly used. Okay. But before that, this is in effect what we were doing. We could actually uh, not simply as chemists. Chemists obviously do wonderful things with materials, simply
Mm.
wonderful
Mm.
things. Okay. But even as physicists, even as electrical engineers, even as mechanical engineers, you could actually create materials with very complicated morphology, microscopic morphology, or small scale morphology, and that at the upper scale macroscopic level, they would appear to be very different, okay, from your ordinary materials. So do something as simple as this, what I'm going to say. Take your eraser, like the pencils have erasers at the end. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Rub that eraser against a piece of paper, and you will find that the eraser will break up into curlicues, right? Like
Mm.
curls. I mean, take
Yes.
all of these
Yes.
curls. This is an experiment I have wanted to do. I have to say this. Take
Wonderful.
these curlicues and disperse them in an epoxy. Okay, and now you have a material uh, which uh, which could perhaps be called a micropolar material.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, how do I know about this term? Well, I happen to read some books on micropolar elasticity, and I began to understand what was happening there. What would happen at the microscopic scale, if you will. Okay. And then one could then from microscope, what one would then see what would be the effects at the large scale, the scale of everyday human experience. Okay,
Mhm,
so you
mhm,
could have these micropolar materials. Okay, um, I thought of doing that. I actually did do that a little bit, but the experiment, when I did try that, this was I would say about 1987 or so, was really
mhm.
speaking beyond my capabilities. Uh, uh, Partly because of lack of instrumentation. We needed instrumentation that would be in the 100 ultrasonic instrumentation that would be in the 100 to 1,000 megahertz range, which was simply unavailable at that point. But today you can actually make these kinds of composites using 3D printing,
3D printing, yeah, yeah.
right?
It's
And
also kind of a, it's also kind of a meta material, right? Because you
oh,
would
it is
be
a
able to
metamaterial.
engineer it.
Yes, it is a
It is a
material.
meta
I
material.
mean, it's
Uh,
because its properties go beyond the material properties of its constituents. They are deeply influenced by the geometry, and that's why these are
Geometry.
architected materials. So I
Nice,
like to use the word architected. Yeah, yeah.
nice, nice,
One
fabulous.
of my very good friends, Rod Lakes, at
Mm,
the University of Wisconsin, actually was able to persuade a couple of colleagues in China to to make these materials,
mm,
3D print these materials. This is the last about 5 years or so. Uh, the length scales in elastrodynamics are very different from the length scales in electromagnetics. So it is quite easy to do it for elastrodynamics. Okay, the
mm.
length scales are very different. I did also persuade a colleague here to do this for me for the gigahertz scale in electromagnetics. Uh, but the polymers that he was using, they would keep on collapsing. So
Collapsing,
we have
yeah.
not been, we have not yet succeeded, but it's only a matter of time.
Nice, nice.
Yeah,
This is fabulous. This also means that are bridging optics with materials,
yeah,
and this kind of interface, as you also mentioned, interdisciplinarity is one of the hallmarks of your work, where you also look at problems in electromagnetics and ask the question, which is the kind of material which would be able to do this particular specific operation and kind of an optical operation, or it can be even in other wavelengths. For example, it can actually go to even gigahertz, as you mentioned, especially also even touching into streams of, let's say, microwaves and other kind of streams too. So this kind of thinking, this process of thinking of being creative, how did you foster that, Akhilesh? How did you really come to this particular point where you are now looking at a problem and you are looking at it as through a specific kind of matrix, and you also have other problems in another matrix? It's a combination of matrices which actually lead to this creativity. Could you tell us about how do you go about making this connection, which is at the heart of being a creative scientist?
well, okay, so let me first of all say that I still find it amusing when people tell me that I work in optics. I have never studied optics apart from high school level or a little bit of college physics level. I've never really studied optics. Okay, I know a little bit about lenses, etc. But then who
Mm,
doesn't?
mhm.
Okay, all right, that's not a big.
That's an understatement, Akhilesh, because we who know you for a very long time, we know that you are a scholar in optics. But anyway, please go ahead.
No,
Please
I
go
mean, I'm serious.
ahead.
I don't consider myself to be an optics researcher. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
what
okay.
happened was in 1990 or so, I had a colleague here at Penn State, Chandra Vikram, and he
Hmm.
says, "Akhlesh, you do optics," and I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "I do electromagnetics," and he says, "No, you do optics," and I said, okay, well, if you say so. Chandra was a brilliant in optics, brilliant. He was a graduate of IIT Delhi, and
Uh-huh, okay.
then he was at Penn State for, I'm going to say, about 15 years, close to 15 years. Then he went to University of Alabama in Huntsville.
Hmm,
Chandra
hmm.
was a very extremely dear friend of mine. This is one thing, you talk about creativity. It is great to have friends who are themselves creative.
Mm.
And, these are friends who are not simply colleagues. So you kind of shoot the breeze with them, do that twice a week with them. Okay. And you talk about science, and you talk about cinema, and you talk about all kinds of different things, and you learn from each other. So I learned a lot from Chandra. So Chandra said to me that you do optics, and I said, all right, fine, if you say so, I'll accept that. And I found to my surprise that other people started saying to me that you do optics after a while. And now, for example, you are saying that. uh, so, so in about 10 years ago, SPIE asked me to convene a one-day workshop on innovation, and I had to at that point think about this issue. What really creates, how to make yourself innovative, something like that.
Mhm.
And I think there are fairly straightforward ways of doing so. Uh, uh, it You also, at the very outset, I should say this, that you need complete support from your family.
Mm.
Complete support from your family. And to some extent, you become antisocial. I have no interest in attending the wedding of any relative or friend. For me,
Nice.
it's a waste of time. You're getting married, fantastic.
Mhm.
Here's a gift. That's it. Okay.
Mhm.
Uh, 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 it's, you know, there's a limit to the number of weddings I want to attend. Maybe one every 5 years or something of that kind. Okay. Uh, and similarly, I'm not very much interested in birthday parties.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to become somewhat antisocial in this respect. Okay.
You
And then
don't get into trouble. You don't
yeah,
get into trouble with
yeah,
your
that's why that's why
family members.
you need a very supportive family.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're
That's
right.
what you need, a very
Yeah.
supportive family. Okay. So yeah, I have no great desire to be in many of these things. Just
Mm,
very few.
mm,
Okay. So the reason for that, I think, is fairly straightforward. I have a limited brain capacity. I can only do a few things. Okay. And if I start filling it up with information on who who is the grandson of whom and all that kind of stuff, that's a waste of my very limited whatever, memory space. Okay. Uh, so one thing that you have to do if you want to be again, that's what I think, innovative, is to first of all look. And looking means many things. One of them is look at papers, look at the seashore, look at the trees around you. Okay. Go and attend seminars of other people's. Okay. Talk to other people. Okay. Things like that. So looking is not simply looking at pebbles on the seashore, but look in general. Keep your eyes open. So you start with
Observation, kind
observation.
of
You
observe
you collect data this way.
data. Yeah,
Data. Okay.
very
Once you have
nice.
collected this data, this is probably what happens to little children. When they are 6 months old, they are collecting data, very likely. Okay.
Absolutely,
And then they
absolutely.
slowly start making some sense of the world, right? Okay. Then you have to start organizing that data.
Mm, mm.
And that requires basically becoming some sort of a librarian. Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, you have to say this thing goes here, and this thing goes here, and this thing goes here, and then how do they in and then you have to find connections between them. Okay. So look and learn, of course, and then you organize. And it is in this organization that you start finding holes. And then you start asking questions. Well, if that happens there, why doesn't it happen here? Or what prevents it from happening? And so on and so forth. You ask questions. Okay. And I'm not, do you remember those cartoons, Far Side cartoons?
Yeah, yeah, I've heard. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
the Far Side cartoons are wonderful way of representing this kind of thinking. So when you, for example, when you go on a safari,
Mm.
are you the prisoner of animals?
No. Wow, that's a fantastic thing. Yeah.
Right. So you start thinking from different points of view, the same
Mm.
thing. Okay. This also reminds me of there was an American poem from the 1850s, The Six Blind Men of Indostan. You know,
Yes, yes.
right?
Yeah.
We all can see only some parts of this elephant, and then we imagine we have known the elephant, but the elephant is a much bigger beast than its ears, or its trunk, or its feet. Okay, all right. So you have to appreciate that other people can see other things, and then you
Other
learn,
things.
and then you ask questions about why and why not. I remember one of my dear friends, and colleagues, as it turns out, who's unfortunately no more, Werner Weigelhofer. So
Mm.
he was Austrian, but he was a professor of mathematics at the University of Glasgow. And this is at a time uh, when we could send emails to each other quite easily. So early in the morning, I would get cricket news from him. He was the only Austrian I know who enjoyed cricket, and and in those days, getting cricket news in the U.S. was very difficult. Uh,
Difficult. Yes. Okay.
right.
Okay.
So he would send me cricket news in the morning, and then we would, send emails to each other and conduct discussions through emails. Okay. Uh, so he once told me about Conrad Lorenz, the one of the he was an ethologist who won a Nobel Prize for physiology or medicine, and he said that every day in the morning he creates a hypothesis that he tries to disprove by the evening.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's a fantastic way of doing things. I can tell you from experience. Get up in the morning, make a proposition, and try to disprove it by the evening. And if you can disprove it, fantastic. But if you can't disprove it, maybe you are seeing the germ of some truth.
Hmm.
Maybe. And then continue with it, persist with it, and you may have to persist with it for months, for years, maybe. Okay. But that's the kind of approach to inquiry that you have to have, and that is why attending weddings is a waste of time.
that's a that's a beautiful argument what you've given us, but also it's a masterclass on thinking, not just only about scientific thinking, but also it is a great model for thinking in general, because this aspect of observation and organization, questioning, and then addressing that particular question is actually a great model to think, right? Because this is actually the foundation on which a lot of good critical thinking happens, and it probably also kind of seeps into the aspect of how to really think and live your life from a scientific viewpoint. And this is something which is very fascinating. And could you please tell us a little bit about this particular process, that very nice kind of lineage what you created? Is this something you stumbled upon by chance, or was it a deliberate thought which you really thought through, and then you came up with this kind of a processing?
So no, this was not deliberate. No, this was
Mm.
not. This is only in hindsight. uh,
Hindsight, yeah,
this
yeah.
is only in hindsight. I I I remember that I had a professor named V.V. Menon in IIT
Mm.
BHU. He used to teach mathematics, and one of the funny things he would do, he would come into classroom and he would start reading out the names, take roll call attendance, and, and then after the 20th name or so, you'll say, okay, no more proxies. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So it was a very, very, very funny person. I remember him very fondly, very fondly. One day he comes into class and says, you know what? I'm not going to teach you what I was supposed to teach you today, but I am going to teach you uh, about looking at propositions
Mm,
and questioning them. So he said the Greeks had a particular quote unquote solved a specific problem, and the problem was something like this: that suppose you have 2 points and you draw a line between them. Of course, the shortest distance is that of a straight line, right? That
mhm,
we're
mhm.
talking about a plane here. Okay. Now draw some other line, so which is not, of course, a straight line; it's a curve. He said, and find its height. I mean, the maximum distance between the straight line and this curve. Now he says,
Mm.
now draw another curve and make sure that its height, that maximum difference, is less than the previous ones.
Nice,
And then
nice. Yeah,
draw the next one whose height is even less, and so on and so forth. So clearly, since you are doing it by design, the height is going to zero.
very nice,
You're doing
nice,
it by design. And then he says, is the length going to be the length of the straight line?
nice.
And, common sense kind of tells you, yes, that's what it will
Yes.
be. And then he drew a very, very simple set of curves. He drew an isosceles triangle, the two sides, the curved
Mm.
side,
Yeah.
the two bent sides of the isosceles triangle. And then instead of two isosceles triangle, he had four isosceles triangles. So they were of a lower height. And then he had eight isosceles triangles that were even of a lower height. And you kept on doing that, and the length remained the same, but the height kept on decreasing. So here was a fairly straightforward counterexample of that. And he may have mentioned the name of Weierstrass. I don't remember. He may have mentioned the name, but quite by a chance, one of my when I was a postdoc here at Penn State, one of my again very dear friends, Russ Messier, stops by and he introduces me to the idea of fractals.
Mm, mm,
Now, somewhere I must have kept what Dr. Menon had said, in some pigeonhole. I had put it there, and it was there. And I said, "Wow, this is what a fractal is." Okay, all right. Of course, it took me some more time to understand, better, but the connection had been made.
nice, nice.
And so I probably did write a few papers on fractals and scattering by fractal geometry, objects with
Mm,
fractal geometry, etc., and things like that. So what I'm trying to say is that seemingly disparate ideas, if you remember them, and if you when you put them together, you come up with some things that are very different from what you had initially envisioned. And if you make this a habit, then I think you are well on your way to becoming innovative. Now,
yeah.
when I talk about look and learn and organize, etc., nowadays, that is because I simply cast a look back at
Mm,
what
mm.
I did, and and this. So there was nothing deliberate about it, at least not in the way that I learned from a self-help book or something like that. No, no,
Got it.
just happened. But of
Yeah,
course,
that
you need
that.
a very supportive family for this.
Mm, mm. I get your point. In fact, this is also kind of a distillation of years of experience, having been a researcher and having also thought through the process of uh, asking questions and looking at things from a hindsight, and that is also kind of a very important part of this whole process. So, going further, if you also look at the kind of problems what you have chosen to work on, I'm sure that it would have also been influenced by your ecosystem, by your colleagues, by your students. Could you please paint us the picture of your some of the great collaborations you have had? You already mentioned, Craig Borain, whom we adore as one of the greats in optics and photonics and various different communities. And of course, Akhlesh himself has written so many fantastic books. I have actually also kind of noted down, and I'll be posting some of the links to some of his books. And it's a must. In fact, some of the things what I have myself personally learned from Akhilesh's work is through some beautiful books what he has written. And I would urge students and anybody who is interested in that particular topic to have a look at it. So Akhilesh, give us a flavor of this collaborative approach what you have taken. You have of course worked on your own and also collaborated with various different people. That is one part of it. The second part is also the process of scholarship, what you have really, you've been participating in, where you have written so many interesting papers, very very insightful books. Give us this two-part aspect of your work. One is the collaboration, the other one is the scholarship of writing very important stuff. Please tell us a little bit more about that.
So, so collaboration. So innovation takes place at the seams. That's,
Mm.
you have heard it from others also, and I have experienced it. Okay, innovation takes place at seams. Okay,
Mm.
and you really cannot learn everything yourself. You have to rely on others and learn from them. You don't have to learn how to do, but you have to learn some fundamental ideas from them, some basics from them. Okay, and then so to say, uh, so if you will, Joseph's amazing Technicolor coat, you know, something like that. Okay, be this is where an ecosystem is so important. Uh, and this ecosystem comprises has 3 or 4 components to it. One of them are your colleagues. If you are, if I mean, I've been blessed to have some fantastic colleagues. Craig Boren, of course, I mentioned Werner
Mm.
Weigelhofer. Nowadays, Tom Mackay at the University of Edinburgh,
Tom
for
McKay.
example.
Yes,
Okay,
yes, yeah.
Torben Lenau at Danish Technical University. So I mean, I've been very blessed that I've been able to find such people. Raúl Martín Palma in
Mm.
Spain at the Autonomous University of Madrid. So, incidentally, just as a digression, you do realize that these people are all from different countries. So, science
Yes, yes.
is a universal enterprise. There is no such thing as Indian science. There is no such thing as Jewish science, or there is no such thing as Hindu science,
Mm.
or Muslim science, or no, 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 no. Science is deeply human activity. Okay, deeply human activity. So if somebody if uh, somebody like Ibn Sahel could discover the law of refraction in the year 981,
Mm.
it belongs not only to the Arabs, it belongs to me as well. Okay, this is this is important to realize. So what somebody in China finds, what somebody in South Africa finds, what somebody in India finds, they all belong to me. Okay, okay, this is a this international. Well, why international? It is possible that in a few, we live long enough, maybe in 2000 years we may be conversing science with camels, or with species of completely different kinds, dolphins. Okay, so this is, you should be open to learning and doing things with anybody who can learn and do things. Okay,
Absolutely.
I don't think of international boundaries as boundaries, except of course in an administrative sense,
Mm.
that you have to go from one place to another and you have to show some papers and so on and so forth for traffic control, basically. Okay, uh, So that this is important, and if you have an ecosystem that supports it, and I cannot think of a better ecosystem in modern times than the American university. The American university is indeed a microcosm of the entire planet. People from all countries, people from different cultures, they all gather here. And, they may be Armenian or they may be Azerbaijani, but when they are here, we all become humans. We all do things together. Okay. That's important. That's extremely important. Okay. This So you need people from diverse backgrounds, from diverse viewpoints, and you need to engage with them, and they should be, of course, be ready to engage with you. That's also true, and the American university generally allows that to happen. Okay, so that's important. The second is that s- that science does require resources.
Mm.
Okay. Otherwise, it can degenerate into unproductive philosophy. Not all philosophies are unproductive, not at all. But there are some that are unproductive. The ones that are particularly derided as counting the number of angels on the head of a pin. Okay. So we need to have resources to do science. And this is where it's important that society invests in science, not not to not because there is a hope of financial benefit. No, although that may arise, that may arise and will arise in many cases, in most cases. Okay, sooner or later. Okay, but because we are a thinking species, and what one person thinks becomes the property of everyone else. So science needs resources, and those resources can only be given by governments, and in democracies by people, indirectly, of course. Also, some rich people can fund these kinds of efforts. Uh, I I mean, I have to say that in the United States, the government in the last, well, I don't know, 50 years has been very generous, although sometimes it seems less nowadays than it used to be. Okay. And there have been private foundations that have been very generous in supporting these activities. So you don't need resources. And those resources don't need to be that you should have the latest laboratory. The resources can be that you have subscription to some journals, electronic journals today. Okay, that would be great enough. Okay, many cases. So that's another thing that you need an ecosystem where people fund. I'm not an economist, but I think in countries like China, United States, uh, something more than 2% of the GDP is spent on higher education, etc. Okay, research, R&D, etc. So that seems to be some sort of a magic number, about 2%, 2.1%, somewhere around that. Okay, so that's needed. Okay, that investment is needed. This is an investment into our future as a species. This is not.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's necessary. Okay. At the same time, there has to be a culture which is not only scientifically driven. It must acknowledge that many things that humans do are worthy of being supported. Uh, I mean, you listen to Lata Mangeshkar singing in 1948. I listened to her, and my spirit soars. So we need to have singers. You listen to, I mean, I remember listening to Ustad Bismillah Khan, in having lived in Banaras for 5 years. Okay, it'd be hard not to. Okay, uh, you know this is fantastic. Or the paintings of Gemini Roy, or the
Mm.
frescoes of Michelangelo. Okay, or
Mm.
looking at the beauty of the Parthenon. Okay. You need all of these. It's not science alone, it is the entire range of human activity that It is that entire range ennobles us, and in doing so, we get ennobled. Okay, that is what is needed. Uh, for so peace, that brings me to something that many people are not very fond of these days. Peace. You need peace for this.
Beautifully put. Really, really. See, this is also an important exposition on how how science actually is not just done inside a laboratory or in front of your computer or at the table. It actually is a human endeavor, and all the requisites for a good society is also a requisite for doing good science, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's something which is very nicely actually built in this particular kind of conversation what we had just now. The other aspect I would want to touch upon is your scholarship of writing. That is something which I am always fascinated by. We Many of us people who actually are interested in writing look at the kind of constancy you have in terms of scholarship, in terms of the way you put across your thoughts through books, through research papers, editorials, beautiful editorials in Journal of Nanophotonics. When you were the editor in chief, some of the editorials what you wrote were priceless. I would urge people to have a look at it. I'll also link it from the show notes. Tell us a little bit about that, Akhlesh, about your writing process, which beautifully puts together both the narrative and the scholarship together. That is a fascinating thing I've always wanted to ask you.
So I for that I will have to go back to I think about the 10th grade or so. Uh,
Uh-huh.
there was an emphasis on writing at that time in the school I went to, St. Francis High School, and I mean, I think I wrote tolerably well. I, you know,
Mm.
passed enough exams and all that kind of stuff. Okay, um, but I was visiting an uncle of mine in Allahabad, and he had this a very slim volume called India Rediscovered. It was it was a highly abridged version of the discovery of India by Jawaharlal Nehru,
Mm. Mm.
and in those days again in India books were very few, very difficult to find, very difficult to find. Certainly books outside your high school books were difficult to find. Uh, anyway, I started reading that book, India Rediscovered. I actually tried for many years to find it again. I could not. But just about a year ago, I happened to see it. PDF is available on the web. Okay.
Oh,
Uh,
wow, wonderful.
yeah, PDF is available. So I read India Rediscovered, and I was struck by how beautifully Jawaharlal Nehru wrote. He was a wordsmith. He was a sentence smith. No word was used without, there was nothing superfluous about his writing. And it was direct. And I said, this is how I should start to write. I should start writing. And I started doing that. Okay. And then between in the Indian school certificate exam in November 73 and going to Banaras in 74, July 74, I had a period of time. And at that time, the library of the UP Civil Secretariat in Lucknow had become
Mm.
available to me because of my father.
Nice.
So I would go with him every so often, and then I would spend the whole day at the library, and then come back with him in the evening. And I chanced upon the complete at least in those days, the complete works of Mahatma Gandhi.
Mm.
Now, Mahatma Gandhi doesn't speak to me, did not speak to me in the way that Jawaharlal Nehru did. And that's not surprising, that's not surprising. But one thing I learned from Mahatma Gandhi, which was if you can use a four-letter word instead of a five-letter word, use the four-letter word. Simplicity.
Nice. Simplicity.
Simplicity
Yes.
is elegance. Okay. And in later years, I realized, he was able to reach the masses of India, the
Mm.
masses
Mm.
of an illiterate India, because of the simplicity of his communication. Okay.
Very,
Uh,
very nice.
so communication must be precise
Mm.
and it must be simple. Okay. And both are essential for good science writing. Both. And then the third experience that I had was uh, in I think in 1989 or so. I asked myself, who are the biggest critics of any literary endeavor? And I realized it is the children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, you try and tell a story to a child of 6. Can you hold his or her attention for more than 10 minutes, 5 minutes? If you are not able to hold that child's attention, okay, your story is useless as far as the kid is concerned, right? Okay, all right. So,
Wonderful.
what must
Mm.
you do to keep the attention of the child till you have finished telling your story?
Nice.
What must you do? And I have to say, in this case, English has been blessed with some fantastic storytellers. The English literature that has been blessed with fantastic storytellers. Okay. And I think of H. Munro Saki, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful storyteller. Okay. But then why should I talk only about English? Why not about Hindi, the other language that I know reasonably well enough? Premchand.
Yes. Nice. Very nice. Yes. Yes.
Premchand. Premchand to me is unsurpassed as a storyteller. Okay, and
Fantastic.
his stories make more sense to me because he wrote about a UP basically, which
Mm.
was quite close to me in time.
Mm.
Okay, and when I even today when I read his stories in Hindi, that is, I say yes, this is something that is plausible that could have happened. That okay, he writes simply,
Mm.
he writes precisely, and he is able to hold my attention because he's writing about something that I care about deeply.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So, this is what you need to be able, this is, and then you have to work at it.
Mm.
Writing is difficult, at least for me. Okay. So for years I would, if I would go to a bookstore. Nowadays, bookstores are not that that common. I would go to a bookstore. I would buy books on, for example, a book on simply words of a certain kind. Okay,
Mm.
where do how do words arise? What are the etymologies? Okay,
Mm.
uh, things like that. And I would buy glossaries. I mean, I have a glossary of cricket terms, for example. Okay.
Nice. Nice. That's interesting.
All right. Uh, so, 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 so these things help greatly. And there is a type of a dictionary that I think is uncommon in the United States, and I think it's probably very uncommon in India, and that is a usage dictionary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not simply a dictionary, but how a dictionary of usage, how words are used. Okay.
Mm.
And you know, I have Merriam-Webster, okay, for
Mm.
English, and I'll read it. I have a Sanskrit to English dictionary, because every so often I want to know what a certain words in Sanskrit means.
Mm.
Unfortunately, I have
Mm.
not been able to find a good Urdu English dictionary. I wish I could.
Ah.
Okay, okay. Uh, uh, so, so knowing a different language helps also greatly, and also start learning about your own language. Just because
Mm.
you know Hindi or Marathi or Gujarati or whatever, whichever language it is yours, does not mean that you actually know the language. You are conversant. You can, spend your whole life with that. But do you actually understand the ideas that particular language can communicate? That you have to really work at it. And then you also have to look at the research work done by research papers of others.
Mm.
Okay. In my case, I was again fortunate to have Craig Boren.
Mm.
Craig is an, Craig is an amazing writer. He is so hard on himself. Okay. Everything has to be extremely precise,
Extreme.
extremely simple. Okay. Okay. So he does that. So I mean, I learned some from him also. Okay. So yeah. So I
Absolutely.
mean, it's a constant exercise. You have to keep working at it.
So one other element, Akhlesh, probably you would probably be taking it as kind of natural, but a lot of people who want to write not only good papers but also books, is that you will also have to have a discipline. And in fact, when I was actually trying to write something, I reached out to you and you gave me some beautiful advice of having to really work through in a constant way, especially you were telling to write regularly. Could you please tell us that part of the discipline aspect, which I found very very important and very kind of relevant?
Well, you you have to look. The world is complex in the sense that things are always happening,
Mm.
and you need to have, when you're writing anything, any book, any paper, but for books for a longer period of time, of course. Okay.
Mm. Mm.
For a paper for a shorter period, you have to have fixity of thought.
Mm. Mm.
And
Very nice.
yes, and so what you need to do is, I mean, at least again, I find that for myself. Okay, I'll wake up early in the morning, at 4 o'clock
Mm.
or so, and then I will write about 200, 300 words.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, that is all that I have written for a paper or whatever I'm doing. 400 words, 300 words, somewhere around that, a page, approximately a page.
Wonderful. Mm.
And and but if I do it every day, then after 100 days or so, I do have a chapter of a book. Okay. Okay. If I do that. But what it does is that regularity, that rhythm, okay, that is there, that helps me keep my ideas fixed. Also, it keeps me connected to the earlier parts of that chapter or paper, whatever it is. So if I say, if I make a change, this in a in my terminology, for example, then I of course immediately have to go back and revise everything. So having that rolling motion also helps, because as you keep on rolling, going back and forward, okay, you find you find irritants, and you try no, to tamp them. Okay, so that's another good way that I have found for myself. So when I write something, I don't want to be disturbed by anything else as much as possible. Now that's not really possible. Okay, I
Mm.
have many things to do. Okay, so I
So
usually
is that the reason why you wake up very early so that you can get a head start so that nobody is
well,
disturbing you?
That is
Mhm.
correct. That is correct. Although in a
Mhm.
20, now I do live in a 24-hour world, so that is not completely, but used to be true.
Yeah, yeah.
Used to be true. Yeah, it's a good thing to get up in the morning, early in the morning, do your things. And I would actually find by the time it was 6 o'clock, 6:30 or so,
Mm,
I would have actually done a lot of work by that time. This work of writing, thinking,
mm.
reading, arranging, all those kinds of things I would have done. And then I had the rest of the day was simply icing on the cake.
Wonderful, wonderful. So this aspect, what you just mentioned about, this is something I've also observed, and a lot of people who are scholars and also who are authors actually mentioning about having this constancy of written word. And this is something which is a lot of people, especially students, sometimes also ask me, like, how do you go about keeping that constancy of number of words per se, like, how do you, because I can understand if, let's say, you're writing a novel, but if you're writing, let's say, a book in science or a research paper, what do you mean by, let's say, 200 to 400 words? What does that really mean uh, for you generally?
For me, it means a page.
Hmm, hmm.
I have to, I have to probably remind you that Premchand called himself Kalam ka Sipahi.
Yes, yes, precisely right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah,
That's what it is. I have to be a Kalam ka Sipahi.
beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, then you also will be spending time to think about the stuff what you're going to write, and you'll also probably be doing analysis. You'll be doing something, but yet with all these things, you will also keep a constancy of written words, right?
Yes.
Is that,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
And I don't want to write more in a day because
Yes, yes.
because the brain does get tired, and
Mm,
there
mm,
are multiple calls on me. I mean, I'm
mm.
not simply a writer. I'm also a researcher. I have graduate students. I have undergraduate students. Uh, you know, uh, there are colleagues to respond to. All kinds of things are happening. So that is what I would do in the rest of the day. But when it comes to
Nice.
writing, and sometimes during the day also, if I find time, I'll say I have 3 hours or so. Okay, let me do
Mm,
this. Okay.
mm, mm,
But again, you have to be. I cannot overemphasize the importance of having a very supportive family.
mm, mm.
You need a supportive family, a very supportive family for doing this. And I've been blessed. My wife has been a constant source of support. Constant.
Wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. So nice to hear about that. One of the things I would want to now branch out is about your new role, relatively new role, and it is a very interesting role, and we are very excited and proud of the this particular achievement, where you are now serving as the Jefferson Science Fellow, where you are also trying to interface and bring out a bilateral U.S. India educational skills working group, and you're spending a lot of time and thinking a lot about this particular collaboration between two democracies and two countries which have had some very beautiful kind of exchange of people, ideas, and also importantly the core values of democracy. Please tell us about this role, Akhlesh, and also tell us a little bit more about this particular role, what you have taken up recently, and what is the agenda for that particular role, and what are the aspects which we have to look forward to, and other aspects.
Yes. So some years ago, I had become very interested in climate change. And of course, I mean anthropogenic climate change. Okay, here, okay. So, and I thought that as a researcher, I should not simply be sitting in my office or my labs, etc. I should reach out to people and do something that will help others directly, as opposed to indirectly through science. Okay.
mm,
And I came to know about this program called the Jefferson Science Fellow Program. So every year, I don't know the exact number nowadays, but it's between, I would say, 8 and 12 scientists are selected from U.S. universities, and they become Jefferson Science Fellows with the U.S. Department of State, which is like the Ministry of External Affairs for India.
mm, mm,
So this department has many bureaus. Many of them are regional bureaus. A bureau for South and Central Asia, for example, another bureau for Western Hemisphere, and so on and so forth. They also have
mm.
functional bureaus. For example, a bureau on disarmament, okay, or a bureau on environment, oceans and environments, and things like that. So, because a lot of diplomacy concerns scientific issues, okay. So I was going to go and join their bureau of BOE, okay, of Oceans and Environment, uh, but I got a call from the India desk of the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, and they wanted to know if I had selected them, and I said no, I'm interested in ocean environment. We want you very badly. And I said, why? And they said, well, India has recently adopted the National Education Policy 2020, and we see that as a very great step forward uh, for the rest of the world, as well as, of course, for India. So we need somebody who can, help us with that. So, I'm not really interested in that kind of stuff. That sounds too much political. And they said, no, we'll shield you from politics. Okay. It's like, but, I said, all right, fine. I'll take a look. I did. And I changed my mind. I, of course, wrote to the national academies. They administer the program, that will you kindly change mine to the South and Central Asian affairs. And so I was, in the end, assigned to that. Uh, so one of the things they asked me to do was to become, as I said, an expert on the national education policy 2020. And I said, I've been so far removed from schools now in India that for me it's unrealistic. But I can, of course, look at the higher education sector, which is what I did. And yeah, and then for various reasons, I could not immediately join the department, the bureau. So it took me 2 3 months. But this period, I had to understand all these issues involved. And then once I joined, they said to me that they wanted a program whereby the needs of both countries would be served, and in particular of young people. So I spent about a month looking at many different issues: the demographics of India, the demographics of United States, industrial policy of United States, education policy of United States, and of course, likewise, the national education policy in India. And I also conducted. I talked to. In fact, I talked to you at that time. Remember, I talked to some 50 colleagues in Indian universities. Each one of them, some of them, I even gave a questionnaire to fill
Yeah,
out for.
yeah,
Right? Okay.
yeah.
Because I was trying to understand what the real issues are. Okay. And at the end, I came up with this idea that we need to have uh, a fairly narrowly focused pathway whereby Indian students can afford higher education from United States without being funded by United States.
Mm,
And that was important. Okay. And then they become workers, and here I mean workers in a very very in a glorious sense. Okay. They become workers in industry, and whatever that industry is, but scientifically advanced industry. Okay.
mm,
uh, so the idea came that it is possible to an undergraduate degree, whether it is from India or from United States, There are differences in the two degrees. I have to say that too. There are differences, but the the undergraduate degree is a fairly uh, is a fairly unspecialized degree. Yeah, you certainly are graduating with a certain major, but today these majors are not, very simple. Every major
Mm,
has its own complexities, and if you want to then become functional in industry, you need special training, which of course your industry will provide for a while, for whatever the first 6, 7, 10 months or so they will provide. But if you could actually get that beforehand, then you would be functional in industry more or less from the first day onwards. Okay.
mm,
Now, the United States universities, and here I'm talking about, let us say, the top 500. There are about 4,500 degree granting institutions in the United States. So I'm talking about let's say, the top 500, and perhaps even the top 200. In terms of which are highly research active, highly. Uh, the uh, the they are very agile.
mm, mm,
So, I mean, as an example, in 2020, I decided to teach a course on bio-inspired design for the environment, uh, and it took me no time to set that course up, and I started teaching it, and I taught it 3 times, 3 years in a row. Okay, uh, that kind of agility, I think, is hard to find in other countries. Okay, American universities have that agility. Okay. So I said, what we need is that to kind of repackage the courses that are available at American universities. There might be some additions. You might have to add a couple of courses, but at the end of it, you should be able to have what may be called a ten course program. So here, master's degrees are given for 10 courses, 30 credits, 10 courses, whichever way you like to count it. Okay. And I realized that those 10 courses or 30 credits can be earned within a year, within one calendar year. Of course, there is no time to waste here. Okay. And one calendar year I found is the cost at a decent American university is something that Indian students can afford, either in some cases through private means, in other cases through lenders, commercial lenders. And when I was in India in December, I saw in both Hyderabad and Bangalore, commercial lenders were advertising, everywhere that,
mm.
we can give you 30 lakhs or 40 lakhs or 50 lakhs to get a deal. Because you see, they see that as a valuable proposition. You borrow money from them, you get a degree. As a result of the degree, you get employed, then you can repay them. That's fantastic. Okay. So this is something that is possible, and the average Indian student borrows about last year no, in 2022 borrowed $49,800 for a master's degree. Okay, in America at an American university. So I put my limit at $60,000. I said, this is it, 60,000, no more than that. Okay. And I was able to talk to several universities in the US to create programs, to start creating programs. So, in many cases, they have to repackage their courses and maybe create one or two new courses. But it's a repackaging. In some cases, they may have to start de novo. Okay. So, for example, the, 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 the University of Dayton, uh, in Ohio, they have a department of electro-optics and photonics. And I said, create a 12-month degree in electro-optics and photonics. And, they agreed. And in fact, they have started. They actually have a degree, a 12 months degree in electro-optics and photonics. And they have concluded agreements with I think at least three Indian institutions. Oh, and of course, part of it is that students will not apply directly, but they will a cohort
Mm,
of students from an institution in India would apply. So a particular Indian university selects, let's say, 20 students, and it forwards their names to the American partner. And the American partner, based on, it depends on how many they can accommodate. Because if you have laboratories, you automatically have a limit as to how many
Mm.
students can you have, okay, in a particular stream. So they say, okay, we can have 15, and they select those 15. And then in the fourth year of the undergraduate degree in India, these students may take one or two additional courses or elective courses that will help them get into the master's degree programs easily. Then they have to, of course, perform satisfactorily, whatever that means, to the Indian institution,
Mm.
get a decent GPA, and then they arrive in America and they slot into this. Now, and then at the end of the year, they become eligible for something called an optional practical training extension. So it's an extension of their student visa,
Mhm. Mhm.
and instead, and they are allowed to have this extension for 3 years if they are in a STEM discipline. Okay,
Nice,
so
nice.
3 years is 36 months, and the average salary of somebody who is on such an extension is about $89,000 a year now. So I think that's makes it to make it 270,000 for 3 years. I think they can repay their loan of 60,000 in that duration. So at the end of that period, they have an advanced degree. They have 3 years of actual industrial experience. Industry need not be an industry, it can be a hospital, for example.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. Or it can be an experimental station belonging to the United States Geological Service, for that matter. Those kinds of things are there. Okay. And a degree from India. They have a degree from United States, and a U.S. degree has global currency. That means
Yes,
all over the world it is accepted. Okay.
except
Yeah.
recognized. Yeah.
So I think the trajectory of their lives is completely changed as a result. Okay. So after I talked to colleagues in Indian universities as well as at American universities, I think it's definitely possible to do that. And that is what I have been now trying to publicize. Uh, so I'm no longer a Jefferson Science Fellow as of the 14th of
Oh,
last month. Okay,
oh,
yeah,
okay, 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 okay.
okay.
Yeah,
I mean, that period has ended, but I
ended.
am
Yeah.
chair of the U.S. India Higher Education Partnerships Committee,
Mm. Mm.
which is an organization of the two governments.
Mm.
And what I'm supposed to be doing is to figure out ways to make the passage uh, easier for students, both in India and the United States. And I also want American students to go to India for certain
Mm.
periods of time, perhaps not as long as I want Indian students to come to America. Okay. But that will change over time. Okay. So as an example, when I was in IISc last in December, I was able to persuade them and Penn State to put together a program whereby a certain number of American students would go to IISc for about 2 months, and they would learn about astronautics. Okay.
Nice.
Which, I mean, given the fact that India has recently put a rocket on the moon, we might as well make use of that publicity, that wonderful publicity that worldwide publicity, okay, for India,
Absolutely,
okay,
absolutely.
and say, okay, so we want to do frugal science. We want to do
Mm.
frugal astronautics. Okay, so astronautics, I can very safely say that is really nobody really comes close to United States. But when it comes to frugality, nobody comes close to India. Okay, so why not we bring both together, and then we will bring American students to an Indian campus, They will spend some time. They will learn some things about India. They will learn something about Indian scientists. They will work with other Indian students. Okay, I'm doing this, by the way, for the last 2 years with Taiwan on electronic displays. So, okay,
Wow, wonderful.
okay.
Mm.
So Taiwan is the clear leader, a clear leader in electronic display technology. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
American students are going there, and they are learning about display technology. And I have really not much of an idea how their lives would be changed, but I know already in talking to them that they are now thinking differently. Okay, about their careers. Okay, and add to that, they came to know about Taiwan. They they made friends. They made friends with students, Taiwanese students, as well as with Taiwanese professors. Okay, and we have monthly meetings, and we discuss various things, whatever they are. Okay, so professional development is taking place. So I want the same thing to be done with India, between Indian and American partners. So if an Indian institution and an American institution sign an agreement, they will say, they can say, for example, this is just as an example, let's say the University of Akron, it's a clear leader in polymer science and technology, clear leader. Okay.
Mm. Yes, yes.
We go to uh, a university in India. I don't want to name any particular one at this point, but they are very good in, let's say, in chemistry. Okay, and chemical engineering. So they can say, well, we will facilitate 20 students every year going from our chemistry or chemical engineering departments, or both for that matter, okay, to your master's program in polymer science for 1 year, for 1 year program. Okay, and then they will start working, I don't know, for DuPont, for example. Okay,
Mm. Mm.
or which, but whatever industry, there are many industries, with polymers. Okay, and so both countries will be winners this way. And I want to say, yes, democracy will be a winner. Okay, when two democracies interact productively for each other, then everyone wins. Okay, so having
Fantastic.
this is important. Okay, I also think that this way, Indian students will get to see what the a side of United States. Like any other democracy, there are
Mm.
flaws in every democracy. You know, America has, India has, we have flaws. Okay, but the founding documents of both of these democracies are very noble, and they guide us. They should guide us. Okay, times have changed tremendously. Okay, but they can guide us. There are some invariant principles that are there. Okay, and I think it is good for Indian students to be exposed to invariant principles that are embedded in the founding of United States, and vice versa. Okay,
True.
and I think this way everyone is a winner here. Okay, it just calls for a little bit of rearrangement of thinking.
True.
So
Fantastic.
I hope to
Fantastic.
do this for the next couple of years, and then I
Mm.
hope somebody better than me, or more interested than me, will take over, because eventually we all get jaded
Mm. Mm.
on kind of activity.
But nobody would be able to replace your enthusiasm. That I can say that. No, because it needs to come from inside, and that's very critical. As long as that is there, there is always great hope for this kind of initiative. So we are also almost coming towards the end of the conversation. Before that, a couple of questions. One is actually a request where I know you speak very eloquent Hindustani, and I would request you to actually, speak a few words in that beautiful language. Because a lot of people who do listen to this particular podcast do write to us sometimes telling that why don't you also do it in Hindi or in other languages closer to Hindustani. I know that you have a very eloquent tongue in that particular language. I request you to just speak a few words in that and motivate a few students probably who are listening to this particular podcast about your motivations and also the kind of stuff what you want to tell them. Yeah, please.
कहने पर कुम्हार गधे पे नहीं चढ़ता है आसानी से. You know, I'm so used to speaking in English most of
Yeah,
the time that it is not that straightforward for me to switch to Hindi or
yeah,
Hindustani,
yeah,
to be more
yeah.
precise. लेकिन आ, ये लखनऊ की विरासत है कि मुझको अभी भी उर्दू काफ़ी समझ में आती है, हिंदी तो आती ही है, लेकिन उर्दू भी काफ़ी समझ में आती है और इसका सबसे बड़ा फ़ायदा मैं देखता हूँ जब मैं किसी भी पाकिस्तानी स्टूडेंट या प्रोफ़ेसर से मिलता हूँ, तो एक 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 भाईचारा एक इनमें जो है उत्पन्न होता है, एक कि हम लोग दोनों एक हैं, फ़र्क नहीं है। हम उनसे मैं उनसे वही बात कर सकता हूँ, उसी तरीके से बात कर सकता हूँ जैसे मैं किसी लखनऊ के बाशिंदे से करूँगा, ओके? और उन लोगों को भी बहुत खुशी होती है कि कोई उनकी ज़ुबान को जो है इतना सराहता है, इतना पसंद करता है कि ओके। और अगेन अ, वी आर ऑल ह्यूमन्स, हम लोग सब इंसान हैं।
So,
तो तो अगर मैं किसी की ज़ुबान में अगर बात कर सकता हूँ, तो मैं उसको वो बात करनी चाहिए। आई ट्राई टू डू द सेम थिंग इन स्पेनिश बिकॉज़ ऑफ कोर्स बिकॉज़ ऑफ माय वाइफ। I try to
yes,
say
yes.
things in Spanish also. I'm not very good at it, but I try. And you know, the moment I say something in Spanish, you should see how happy those people become. I was in
People are
Bordeaux
absolutely.
a few
Mm,
few months ago for a conference on vacuum science and technology,
nice.
and I spoke to some people in Spanish. I mean, broken Spanish, but Spanish. They were so happy about it.
Poco,
So,
poco español.
no, poquitito, not simply poco, poquitito. Very,
Poquito. Nice, nice.
very small. But
Uh,
it creates that human bond.
Bond.
तो इसलिए
Absolutely.
इसलिए मेरे ख़्याल में ये ज़रूरी है कि जो हमारे वैज्ञानिक हैं, जो हमारे अनुसंधानकर्ता हैं इंडिया में, वो आम इंसानों से बात करें उनकी ज़ुबान में, ये बहुत ज़रूरी है। और इसको हम लोग फैंसी शब्द उसके लिए कहते हैं आउटरीच है,
Mm, mm.
लेकिन ये आउटरीच नहीं है, ये हम मुझको मैं देखिए लेट मी पुट इट दिस वे, मैं बहुत ही कृतज्ञ हूँ उस समाज का जो मुझको वो काम करने देता है जो कि मैं करना चाहता हूँ और मुझको पैसे भी देता है उसके ताकि मैं ज़िंदा भी रह सकूँ। तो इससे अच्छी क्या बात हो सकती है? तो उसको मुझको किसी तरीके से वो ऋण जो है, वो ऋण तो चुका तो सकता नहीं हूँ मैं, पर वो चुकाना है, ज़रूरी है चुकाना, कुछ हद तक, ओके? और इसलिए मैं अगर उनसे उनकी ज़ुबान में कुछ बात कहता हूँ और उनको कुछ चीज़ें बताता हूँ, तो मैं तो सिर्फ़ अपना धर्म निभा रहा हूँ, ओके?
Nice.
यस,
खूबसूरत. बहुत बहुत लाजवाब. That is what I have to say because that eloquence, that beautiful language, uh, coming from down south, I can understand everything. Of course, I am also educated in Hindi, but there's no way I could use those beautiful words as you
थैंक
very
यू,
nicely
थैंक
did.
यू।
And it's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure. So before I let you go, one small question which I generally ask to the guests is to actually give you recommendations on art, on music, and a lot of things what you actually consume as part of your relaxation, so that our listeners also would take away something which is beautiful and which is part of your own life, so that would be something for them to also think and take away.
Well, I certainly love music, and I I think that I'm drawn to ghazals. Uh,
Mm, mm.
No doubt about it. And but I grew up with ghazals sung by Talat Mahmood, for example, and then later by Jagjit Singh, and there were others. So ghazals are there, but then there are others. I mean, listening to Mozart or Bach
Mm.
or Beethoven, and listening to Bhimsen Joshi, listening
Yes.
to Bismillah,
Yeah.
listening, these are this is music that uplifts my soul. Okay. But it's not simply that. Listen to pan flutes from Bolivia. Listen to
Mm.
shakuhachi from Japan. Okay. And I dare say I do not know a lot more. Okay. But some years ago, I had a friend who introduced me to buziki from
Wow.
from
Mm.
from Greece. And you have all heard of Zorba the Greek, right?
Mm.
So for example, that music. And so music from anywhere in the world, I find it interesting. Of course, some more than others, but Bolivian music, that, as I said, pan flutes, for example,
Mm. Mm.
shakuhachi, that is just great. uh, and uh, and of course there is the enormity, if you will, of both Hindustani and Karnataka.
Mm.
you know
Mm.
is there. It's
Yes.
my direct patrimony. Okay, that's there. But I don't want to exclude Beethoven. I don't want to exclude Mendelssohn. I don't want to exclude Rachmaninoff. Okay, they also are part of my patrimony. So anything that strikes that makes me happy. and
Mm.
and I should end by actually saying there is really one and only one directive I believe humans have. Uh, my grandparents,
Mm.
when I would this is of course when I was a child, I would touch. They died before I was 12. Okay, when I would touch their feet, they would say, "Sada khush raho," always be happy. And at that time, I had
Beautiful.
not realized how beautiful that blessing is. But today I say yes. The chief directive to every human being is be happy. So do anything that makes you happy. And if it really makes you happy, then it will also be for the benefit of everyone else.
Beautiful. Beautiful, Akhilesh. This is very touching, very moving, and it also, brings in the human element, uh, not only as a scholar but as a person who has lived a very thoughtful life. And this kind of, in an essence, icing on the cake for Pratidwani, so to speak, because the main motivation behind Pratidwani is to humanize science. And the last couple of hours, what you have done is essentially humanize science, which is, I know, one of your main motive goals in your own work. I am honored to have this conversation with you. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure. And if anyone writes to me from after listening to you, I will certainly answer them very quickly. And
Thank
I
you.
don't know how many more friends I will make this way. That's wonderful.
Yeah, you should just definitely. This is Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science with one and the only Akhlesh Lakhtakia.
Thank you.